Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with charred broccoli beef. That's right, we're burning broccoli. Except this time we're doing it on purpose. And that's just going to be one of two major tweaks we do to this Chinese-American takeout favorite. And I know this is 2 broccoli videos in a row, but I've wanted to share this for a while, and it has absolutely nothing to do with my secret need to redeem myself when it comes to working with broccoli. Alright, fine, that is the actual reason. And now that I've confessed to that, we can go ahead and get started with the second major tweak to this recipe, how we prep and cook the beef. And this will work with all kinds of different cuts, but what I have here is 1 pound of skirt steak, which is generally sold trimmed and ready to use. And I know it still has a little bit of fat on there, but a little bit of that white surface fat is totally fine, if not desirable. So I'm going to be working with this as is. And what we're going to do to prep this is cut it in half first, so it fits into the pan a little easier. And then we're going to go ahead and season both sides very generously with kosher salt, some freshly ground black pepper, as well as some cornstarch. Not a ton, but enough to lightly coat the surface. And we are definitely going to do that to both sides. And in case you didn't know, how this is normally done is the raw meat is sliced into thin strips. Then the cornstarch and seasoning is applied, before all those thin slices of beef are quickly stir-fried in a wok or other ridiculously hot pan. And if you're in the right conditions, that is a fantastic method. But I think the following approach is going to work better for the home cook, because what we're going to do is sear the meat like this, let it cool, and then slice it thin. That way we know we have browning on every piece, as well as it's going to be a lot easier to control the doneness. So anyway, like I said, we're going to season and starch both sides, at which point we can move to the stove where we're going to sear this over high heat in a little bit of vegetable oil for about, 3 or 4 minutes per side, or until that surface is beautifully browned and crusty, and the meat's cooked to around a medium rare. So that's what I did, gave it about 3 or 4 minutes per side, until it looked a little something like this. At which point we're going to transfer that to a plate to cool, and cool completely. Alright, that's why we did this step first. So we'll go ahead and leave that on the plate till it cools completely. At which point you can slice it, or even better, pop it in the fridge until it's really cold, and then slice it, which works even better. Okay, but either way, we are going to cook and cool our beef ahead of time. And while we're waiting for that, we might as well go ahead and mix up our sauce, which is going to start with a few spoons of oyster sauce. Ooh, check it out. So dark, shiny, and mysterious. Which is probably why you should Google it. All I know is it's kind of sweet and is made with an oyster extract. And then to that we're going to add some sherry wine, because I'm assuming you don't have Chinese cooking wine. And as you know, any dry sherry is going to work here except ones labeled cooking sherry. And that's literally the only one you don't want to use. I know that is ironic, and we'll touch on that in the blog post. But for now, let's continue with a little bit of soy sauce, as well as a little touch of ketchup, which I'm putting in for some color and acidity. I always feel like I have to explain myself when I use ketchup. And then we're also going to need a little bit of stock. I'm using chicken, but beef will also work here. And then last but not least, we'll whisk in a little bit of cornstarch, which will of course thicken our sauce at the end. And by the way, another thing I'm going to touch on in the blog post is how you can adjust the amount and thickness of this sauce to your liking. Okay, I tend to go for something that's fairly light, more like a glaze, as opposed to others who may prefer a much thicker sauce and or a lot more of it. So we'll cover all that, but for now we'll just give that a mix and set it aside while we move on to our last and most important component, our charred broccoli. And what we're going to need is 1 pound of fresh broccoli florets that have been cut into whatever you consider a bite-sized piece, which is what I think these are. And please don't take this the wrong way, but nobody cares how big you cut your broccoli, as long as they're all about the same size. And that is simply so they cook as evenly as possible. And then the only thing we're going to add here is a couple teaspoons of vegetable oil, which I'm going to drizzle over, and then I'll give these just a very brief tossing by flipping them around in the bowl like this, because I'm a show-off. But if you want, just go ahead and mix that up with your hand or a spatula. And then once those have been very, very, very lightly coated with oil, we will transfer those to a foil-lined baking sheet. And we'll arrange those in a single layer. And ideally, if possible, have your stems pointing down and your flour sides pointing up. And then what we'll do once that's set is transfer that into a 500-degree oven for about 10 to 12 minutes, or until our broccoli starts to char. And if you're thinking, why would you burn broccoli? That's going to taste terrible. Well, you would think, but it doesn't. It makes it taste amazing. And even though we have some decent color on those, the stems are still fairly firm, which is fine because this is going to get cooked a little bit in our sauce when we finish. So these were just about perfect, but I did want a little more color on them. And we could just pop those back in the oven for 3 or 4 more minutes. But another possibly quicker method would be to pop these under a hot broiler for just a minute to finish our charring. So that's what I did, and a minute later they look like this. So if you need to pop yours under the broiler for a little bit, go ahead. You are, after all, the David Carr of how far to char. So as you can see, I got a little more charring on the flour, and yet, as I said, our stems still have a little firmness to them. And then what we'll do once that's set, assuming our meat is cold, is go ahead and slice it up using a very specific technique. So what we're going to do first is find the grain, which is really easy with skirt steak. Okay, we can see those meat fibers are running this way. And what we'll do is cut that in 2 or 3 pieces with the grain, meaning in the same direction as the fibers. And then, double checking we're going the right direction, we will slice each of those pieces against the grain in the thin slices, about 1/8 of an inch. And by slicing it this way, you ensure very tender, easy to chew pieces. All right, skirt steak is very, very delicious. But if you were to cut these slices with the grain, you would have to chew each piece from between 7 and 10 minutes. So we'll go ahead and slice up our meat in nice bite-sized pieces, making sure we're going across the grain. And then once that's set, we can move into final assembly and put all these components together. So we'll go ahead and move back to the stove. And yes, as you may have noticed, I'm using the same pan I used to cook my steak. And we will add a little touch of vegetable oil, into which we will transfer our minced garlic. And you'll also notice I started this off cold. All right, I like to add my garlic and then turn on the heat. All right, since the only way at this point to screw this up would be to overcook the garlic. So if we toss it into smoking hot oil, there is a danger it can go too far. But with that pan coming up to temperature slowly, it is way, way easier to manage. So we'll simply wait for the pan to get hot and for our garlic to start sizzling, at which point we're only going to cook it for about 30 seconds. Okay, like I said, we don't want any color. And I know it looks like it has a little color, but that's actually from the leftover meat juices in the pan. And then what we'll do once that's sizzled for about 30 seconds is go ahead and transfer in our beef, along with any accumulated juices. We will also go ahead and toss in our recently charred and still relatively firm broccoli, as well as our sauce mixture. And we will go ahead and stir all that together. And once we have all our components in the pan, finishing this is very, very easy, because all we're going to do is cook this on medium-high, stirring occasionally, until everything's heated through and our sauce thickens up a little bit. And again, let me remind you, I'm not using a lot of sauce here. I just like enough sauce to sort of coat it like a glaze. Well, actually, that's not true. I like a ton of sauce, and way thicker. But I thought I'd do a slightly healthier version. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and keep stirring and cooking until our broccoli heats through and those stems get just barely tender, as well as, of course, our beef heats through and our sauce thickens up. And once that's all been accomplished, we are ready to serve up on some rice. Although, as usual, it's not a bad idea to taste your sauce and maybe a piece of broccoli and beef, just in case you have to adjust your seasonings, maybe add another splash of soy. But I determined mine to be perfect, so I went ahead and served it up. And by the way, the reason we charred the broccoli was for flavor, but I also love what it does to the appearance. Since it kind of keeps that dark green color, it doesn't really turn gray like your traditional broccoli beef recipe. But anyway, we'll go ahead and serve that up and finish it with an extra spoon or 2 of sauce. As well as I decided a little shake of cayenne. I thought a little heat would be nice, but also I love how that warms up the color. So I finished up with a little bit of cayenne, and that's it. Our charred broccoli beef is ready to enjoy. So let me go ahead and grab a fork and dig in. Yes, the chopsticks were just for the picture. But anyway, no matter what you use, if you are a fan of the broccoli beef, I think you're going to love this version. I mean, no sane person actually gets excited eating broccoli, but this is probably as close as you're ever going to get. All right, that little bit of char might seem crazy, but the bitterness really brings out the sweetness in the vegetable. And as far as our beef goes, while it's not going to have the exact same texture as you're used to from those takeout places, it's going to be very flavorful, very tender, and because of how we prepped it, still very juicy and not dry. But anyway, that's it, charred broccoli beef. Before I sign off, I should apologize to your friendly local neighborhood Chinese takeout place, who I assume will experience a significant decrease in broccoli beef sales. But despite that, because this is so easy and delicious, I really do hope you give it a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.